All right, Senator, let's switch over to the algae situation on the Treasure Coast. You toured the area, you've talked with the experts there. How long do you think the people there on the Treasure Coast will see this situation unfold?
Well, we have two issues at play. The first is the algae that's already there, and no one's quite clear how long it's going to take for that to dissipate. And by the way, once it does, the problems continue. Once that algae dies, it becomes even more toxic. So one of the things we're asking today is for the Centers for Disease Control to come down and give an analysis of what this means for the long term of the region. Because as of today, no one can provide us any technology that could actually clean it up. The long-term implications are, when is this going to happen again? Because the reality is the conditions exist for this to happen again after some rainfall. You have all this nutrient-rich water coming in from the north into Lake Okeechobee, and every time that it's released, it's going into areas that also have nutrients, and in this hot weather, it's leading to this algae situation that's now become a national story, and I hope we'll get my colleagues here to expedite things like the Central Everglades Planning Project, which will create projects for us to be able to hold more water and to ultimately send clean water into the Everglades as opposed to the estuaries.
You mentioned you're asking the CDC. Have you officially sent a letter to them, and what in particular are you asking in that letter for them to do?
Well, the toxicity of this algae is already existent. Once it actually dies and turns into this kind of blue-green hard material, it actually becomes even more toxic. So what does that mean in the long term for air quality? What about the kids if this is washed up in the sand and people are digging their hands into there? What does it mean to the water long term? I mean, there is the real chance here that this could turn into a number of things that are very harmful to the population well after the algae stopped growing. The remnants of it can be highly toxic, and so we're hoping they'll come down and evaluate this for us and give us a better understanding of how bad it is and what can be done to protect people there who are going to be dealing with this for months.
Is this something that perhaps you can work with Governor Scott to maybe get President Obama to declare a federal disaster emergency? Would that help abet getting the CDC down here?
Well, it could be part of it, but ultimately the disaster declaration from the president, the governor has to ask for it first. What it will help do is draw down federal dollars to help businesses and residents who have been economically impacted by this event. You have, for example, camps down there on the water that are either closing or seeing a significant reduction in campers who are just canceling. You have small businesses over the 4th of July, one of the busiest seasons of the year, who just saw total cancellations or are unable to go out into the water. So the economic losses of an event such as this is what an emergency declaration will help us draw down federal dollars to help with.
So you would be in favor of a federal state of emergency to be declared?
Absolutely, and we saw that also declared, for example, a few weeks ago in Orlando, and it helped the merchants on that street where the Pulse nightclub was get access to SBA loans in order to help with the revenue they may have lost over the period of time that street was impacted. This is on a much larger scale economically.
Are you working with Senator Nelson, maybe strengthen numbers on any particular issue with the lake?
Well, we've worked on this for a long time. For example, the Central Everglades Planning Project is one we've teamed up on for years. We worked on the 10-mile reauthorization where we took this reservoir that was in federal control, deauthorized it, and gave it over to the state to manage. They're going to double the capacity of water that can be held there. So we have a long time history of working together, but the key issue is the Central Everglades Planning Project. If we can move forward on that, that has all kinds of funding for additional retention of water, both in the north and to the east and west, that will allow us to have clean water go into the Everglades as opposed to this nutrient-rich water coming out of Lake Okeechobee and going into the estuaries.
I know you've been vocal before about not buying the land south of Lake Okeechobee. Again, explain why.
Well, first, I don't want to see any money diverted from our existing projects. We have a pot of money that's been in a number of projects that are being authorized, they've been put in place. I don't want to see those projects slowed down because money is being taken out of those projects into a new project. Now, what the state decides to do is up to them. I'm talking about federal policy. And I think from a federal perspective, I'm going to focus on getting the existing plans funded, because we know if the Everglades Planning Project is funded, if it's put in place and authorized, we know that those projects are going to make a substantial difference in both the amount of water that's released and the quality of the water that is released, and ultimately leads to most of the water being released into the Everglades, which needs more clean water. I don't want to see any funds diverted from that. If the state decides to do something different in terms of purchasing land through eminent domain, that's their decision to make. I'm in favor of whatever helps solve this problem, and I know that what will help significantly prevent this from happening in the future is to finish these restoration projects that will allow us to clean the water, hold it, and release it into the Everglades instead of going to the east and to the west.
Are you frustrated that a lot of this seems to be finger pointing, though? You know, one agency points to another, the feds point at the state. Don't you feel everybody's got to get on the same page at some point here?
Yeah, and that's part of the problem with this, is that there are multiple causes for this. It is true that the Corps of Engineers is releasing a lot of water. They would argue that they can only hold so much because they can't afford to have a flood situation on their hands if the dike were to be breached. It's true that there's pollutants and nutrients along the estuaries itself from septic tanks, but we also know that 90% of the water that goes into Lake Okeechobee is coming from the north. And so that has to be dealt with as well. It's just a combination of factors that all have to be dealt with. And multiple agencies across both the state and the federal government have a responsibility here, and that's why you're seeing all of this back and forth. But I think we need to put all that aside and focus on solutions. That's what I've tried to do over the last 5 years. We've made some progress. We have a lot more work to do, obviously.
And Senator, lastly, then, what's your message to the people of the Treasure Coast after seeing and just smelling that? I'm sure it was hard for you to even imagine.
It is, and listen, I understand why people are angry. I really do, and this is not the first time that something like this has happened. They faced a similar issue in 2013, again in 2014, and it can happen again. And there has to be a sense of urgency. Unfortunately, this is not good news, and this is not going to make anybody happy. The projects that actually help solve this take a lot of money and a lot of time, and we are doing everything we can. We finally got the chairman of the Water Committee, after years of being against it. My friend Jim Inhofe of Oklahoma will finally support the Central Everglades Planning Project. If we can move forward on that, we can actually begin to put in place projects that will help solve this over time. But I get it, I understand. There's not a lot of easy, immediate answers other than to get as much aid and assistance to people as we possibly can in the short term, and that's what I'm going to do as well.
Senator Marco Rubio taking the time this afternoon for us in Washington. Thank you so much, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you.